We're going to go over the end of chapter 8, number 3.4 question. This is about calculating real GDP. So we have a set of information here in the table about 4 goods that are the only thing this economy produces. So suppose the information in the following table is for a simple economy that produces only the following 4 goods: shoes, hamburgers, shirts, and cotton. Further, assume that all the cotton is used to produce shirts. So the reason they add that last line in there is because they want you to understand that cotton is an input and not a final good. So people aren't going to the store to buy cotton balls or cotton to make their own shirts. It's only being used by manufacturers to produce shirts, so shirts will be the end product. And that's important to remember when we calculate GDP, because when we calculate GDP, we're just calculating the final product. The reason this is done is because it prevents us from double counting things. So, and a lot of examples you may have read or seen in some of the videos I've shared are that, if you take the example of a baker, a baker buys flour and sugar and yeast and salt to make their baked goods. And then they sell those muffins and loaves of bread to their community. But if we were to count the flour and then count also the bread and the muffins, etc., we would double count all that stuff because the cost of the flour and the cost of the sugar and the cost of the yeast are being built into the price of the bread and the price of the muffin. So we'd get an inflated GDP number if we were to do that. So that's the reason GDP is calculated this way. So let's take a look at how to calculate the first question. It asks us, if the base year is 2009, then real GDP for 2014 equals, and we have the answer here. And I'm going to show you how to come about that answer. Now remember, real GDP corrects for inflation, so that's why you have to use a base year, so you keep everything in the same year's prices. So in this case, so I have the answer written out. To calculate real GDP, we must use the prices from the base year. In this case, that's 2009. So we have the prices for 2009, and we just keep those same prices even when we calculate 2014 GDP. So in 2014, there were 115 pairs of shoes produced, 100 hamburgers, 55 shirts, and 10,000 units of cotton. We don't count the cotton since it was an input and not sold as a final good. So here's the simple calculation. You just take the amount produced in 2014, and then you use the 2009 price. So you can see I've done that for 2014, and we get the total of 8,105, which matches up with the textbook answer. And then we do the same thing for 2015. We use the quantities from 2015 for those 3 final goods, multiply them by the 2009 prices, and we get this new quantity, this new GDP of 8,585. So that's how to calculate real GDP, which is something useful for your projects as well. You want to see real GDP trends and growth rates. If you don't correct for inflation, you'll see GDP going up all the time almost, unless it's a very, very bad recession where GDP comes down so much, even inflation doesn't wipe it away. So if you really want to see those ups and downs in the GDP in your decade, you have to use real GDP numbers. And you can calculate that yourself if you're ambitious, but you can also find that data from the websites I've provided from Fred. They calculate real GDP in their own statistics. So the next question is about calculating the annual growth rate of real GDP in 2015. So the growth rate just looks at the percentage change from one year to the next. So you'll go from 2014 to 2015. And here you see the formula. The growth rate equals your new GDP minus last year's GDP, all divided by last year's GDP. And then you multiply that by 100% to put it in percentage terms. Otherwise, you'll just get a decimal, something, something much smaller than you want. You want the number to look like a percentage. So when you do that calculation and you multiply it by 100%, you get 5.92%, which is your annual growth rate, which, as you'll see when you do your research, that would be a very strong growth rate, at least for the U.S. Obviously, this is a fake country, so the growth rate is not going to look like what we see in a developed economy like we have. And that's how you do a real GDP calculation and a real GDP growth rate calculation.